Myth, a legendary story concerning heroes and demigods from the Greek mythos. As filmmakers, we are creators of myth. We fracture time, shape light, make worlds larger than life, reveal the supernatural, and stop the world from turning. Of course, there's another definition to myth as an unfounded or false notion, and we filmmakers fall into those too, a little more often than we should. Now, I'm practicing a different type of social distancing here for this video. Here, where I can breathe deep, I'd like to take a moment and explore some of those myths of filmmaking. Not the business school myths about the importance of having a niche, or the resolution myths about 4, 6, and 8K, or the stylistic trends that seem like rules unto themselves, though I could definitely appreciate a little less teal orange in the color grades, or boomy broadcaster audio and the endless repetition of short side backlit scenes. Just please, for a moment, take a look at the breadth of portrait lighting possibilities, from the shape of head-on beauty lights to the chisel of double-sided lights. Look at noir and fashion and the classics that shaped our art before shooting yet another backlit scene and then declaring that only backlight is interesting or beautiful. No, in this moment, while so many of us are waiting for the starting bell and the opening gates to return to work, I wanted to take a look at 3 concepts that are so often repeated that they seem like granite rules that cannot be broken. The first and most common is the 180-degree shutter rule that states that your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. In other words, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter should be at a 48th or a 50th of a second. If you're shooting 120 frames per second, then your shutter speed is 240 or 250, depending upon what your camera can do. Now, the idea behind this rule was to mimic film by producing nearly exactly the same amount of motion blur. And at 24 frames a second, it works. Now, obviously, your frame rate is the least important aesthetic when it comes to mimicking film. Lighting, visual depth, and aspect ratios, the roll-off of light and the use of color will create a more filmic look than your frame rate or motion blur. The 180-degree shutter is one of the foundational rules that most people learn. First, the truth behind it. At 24 frames per second, the rule does create the same amount of motion blur as film. The misconception that's often conveyed is that somehow if you shoot at a high frame rate with a faster shutter, then when you slow it down, you'll get the same amount of blur. But of course you don't. Each individual frame, when shot at 250th of a second, is still the motion blur of 250th of a second when slowed down. It's the exact opposite of filmic blur. In fact, most of the time you can't even tell the difference between footage shot at 250th of a second versus slow-mo at a slower shutter speed like 160th. Well, judge for yourself. No, wait, I'm sorry, I mislabeled those. So what does it mean and why is this important? If you can slow your shutter speed, you can gain up to 2/3 of a stop of light, which might be helpful. And if you think about it, if you're shooting at 30 frames per second for some reason, setting your shutter speed to a 50th of a second will actually get you closer to film motion blur. If anything, the rule should be to shoot with a shutter speed of 1/50th when you're filming at 30 frames per second. Now, why might you want to stick to that 180-degree rule if you don't need the extra stop of light? Well, I think it's because our eyes actually find the extra sharpness in slow motion to be pleasing. We like the hyper-reality, that mythic sense. You don't need a higher shutter speed to get that sharpness, so we can choose when to follow this rule. The color of daylight. Every cinematographer knows that the color of daylight is 5600 Kelvin, maybe give or take 200 degrees, maybe more. But is it really? You don't have to think about it for very long to realize that the answer is no. Light is warmer during the golden hour. That's why it's called golden. A lot warmer, actually. It will go down to about 2400 Kelvin before the sun disappears. The color of daylight is, in truth, changing throughout the day. And that doesn't even include overcast days or partially overcast days, but it gets even deeper than that. Even at midday, without a cloud in the sky, the light falling on your subject isn't 5600, unless they're standing in a desert of gray. It's a combination of 5600 and whatever color is in the reflected light. Here, that color is green and blue and brown. Daylight, as defined by your camera, only exists in the studio. The same goes for indoor color settings of your camera. There's no pure fluorescent light in the real world. So why does this matter, and what does it mean for cinematographers? Well, it means that we should avoid using stock light settings in our camera and set our Kelvin temperature by hand. And whenever possible, use a gray card when accuracy really matters. When shooting in mixed light, you might also want to dial your key light in towards the actual temperature of the ambient light. How? Well, if you have an Android phone, there's this awesome free color temperature app called Light Spectrum Evo. Download it and start examining the actual color of the light around you. Shoulder rigs. Yeah, what could possibly be a shoulder rig myth? Well, I don't think of it so much as a myth as a misconception, the way we default to shoulder rigs as a proper placement for shooting handheld. Now, 20 years ago, professional cameras used to be heavy. The only way to hold them steady was to put them on your shoulder. But unless you're shooting an extreme close-up of someone's eyes, we're actually shooting down towards the subject from the shoulder. But that's rarely the best angle. It makes the head slightly larger proportionally because it's closer to the lens. From a cinematic standpoint, it also pushes your subject into the background or into the ground if they're a lot shorter than you. And this reduces the pop you get from having them stand out from the background. Now, this might seem like a negligible difference, but if we're agonizing over the details of our image, why are we ignoring this one? And does having your rig set up this way physically deter you from exploring other better angles in lieu of a shoulder shot that's slightly off? If you want a flat, even shot, your camera height should be in the middle of your frame. If you're shooting a head and shoulder shot, it should be chin height. If you're shooting from the waist up, it should be chest level. Not their chest, not yours. I found that once I get the camera off my shoulder, I start asking better questions about what angle I want the shot to be, because it's less restricted. Now, there are other important myths that people should think about. From mic placement, there's actually a link below to my video on Hollywood sound, to a large array of confusion about crop sensors and speed boosters. But these are three that really stand out for me.